Central America at the University of Costa Rica. He's also the coordinator of the regional center of the Maria Sibylla Merian project, Center for Advanced Latin American Studies, and is part of the interdisciplinary European Caribbean project Connect Caribbean that hosts this lecture today. From 2012 to 2018, Werner Mackenbach held the chair of the Wilhelm and Alexander von Humboldt Professorship for Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Costa Rica. He was visiting professor at different universities in Latin America, in Mexico, Chile, Guatemala, Nicaragua, or Honduras. And he specializes in Central American and Caribbean literature and cultural history of the region. He is member of the editorial team of different scientific reviews on journals of literature and cultural studies of the Central American and Caribbean region. In 2010, Werner Mackenbach received the Federal Cross of Merit for his special efforts in teaching and scientific research in the cooperation between Germany and Central America. He has a long list of publications. I only mention a few of the recent ones. So, and in the translation of the Spanish titles. So the last one is the Chibcha languages, Central American origin languages, in the work of Walter Lehmann, who was a young German scholar who traveled through Central America at the beginning of the 20th century. Another title is Between Politics, History and Fiction, New Tendencies in the Contemporanean Literature of Central America. Another one is Literature and Political Compromise, Political and Cultural Practices and Aesthetics in the Revolution, towards a history of Central American literature, from 2018. Also from 2018 is the title Transcultural Convergences in Central America and the Caribbean. And two titles from 2016, Globalization, Migration and Cohabitation, Perspectives of Central America, and The Transformation of Violence in Latin America. Today he will speak about the Caribbean and Africa, new perspectives on Blackness and afrodescendance, a topic that fits very well into the lecture about the long and deep history of Africans in America that I addressed during this semester. And it's a very good transition into my next semester, where I will thematize the history of post-emancipation societies in Latin America and the Caribbean, the connections between Africa, the Caribbean and Latin America after slavery, or return movements from Afro-Americans back to Africa, and all the range of problems of identity and nation building in post-colonial Africa, where Afro-Americans have been involved. Now I give the microphone to Werner Mackenbach. The questions afterwards can be asked via Facebook or in the chat, or while marking with a little star and address and speaking just to us. This is very welcome. So, Werner, please.
Okay. Good morning from this side of the Atlantic. Good afternoon, your side of the Atlantic. Thank you so much, Christine, for the invitation to this conference and your kind presentation. As you said, I will speak on the topic of the Caribbean and Africa, new perspectives on Blackness and afrodescendance. And I will share the screen now, but I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation. You can see it?
Sí.
Okay. I will start with a fragment of a poem by the Jamaican writer Louis Bennett, which is called Back to Africa. I read this. Back to Africa, Miss Maddie. You know why you do say? You have to come from somewhere fast before you go back day. But the balance of your family, your whole generation, uno all bandang, a ban grang, uno all is Jamaican. Go a foreign, seek your fortune, but no tell nobody say, you da go for seek your homeland. For the right day, so you day. A poem written in Creole. I will not comment it now. I will turn back on it at the end of my conference. In scholarly research on the Caribbean, it has become a common topic to understand the region in terms of afrodescendance and blackness, or in French, négritude. Without any doubt, this claim of the black as essential for the cultures of the Caribbean has been more than justified and has generated uncountable studies which recovered that black legacy. This, however, has also resulted in a certain tendency to enclose the so diverse cultural space of the Caribbean in a new limited and essentialist conception by prescinding from the multiple and complex processes of transcultural convergency in the course of its history. However, as early as the 70s and 80s of the 20th century, have been emerging comprehensive and innovative essays in and from the Caribbean itself that introduced new dimensions in the debates on Caribbeanness, Antillanité, mestizaje, Creoleness, creolization, and so on. In Caribbean literatures, numerous oeuvres have been emerging that pick out as a central theme, ironize and parody the search for an exclusively Black identity of the Caribbeans and the efforts to return to Mother Africa. In this conference today, I'll present some reflections on this topic in contemporary thinking and literatures in the Hispanophone, Francophone, and Anglophone Caribbeans. And I will speak on these topics. I have a short introduction on the search for identity, and then I will speak about 4 moments of cultural, political movements which search for a new identity. And if we have enough time, I will speak on the concept of afrodescendance at the end of my conference. The search for identity. I always have been wondering why the search for identity has been such a permanent and dominant topic in Caribbean political and cultural thinking and literatures, as well as in the arts. There may be some possible explanations. First, the traumatic and long-standing process of conquest, la conquista, and colonization from the end of the 15th to the 19th century. It is estimated that during the initial Spanish conquest of the Americas, up to 8 million indigenous people died, primarily through the spread of Afro-Eurasian diseases in a series of events that have been described as the first large-scale act of genocide of the modern era. Second, the traumatic history of slave trade and slavery from the 16th to the 19th century. 12.5 million slaves had been shipped from Africa, and 10.7 million had arrived in the Americas. From this, 90% to the Caribbean and South America. That means that about 12% of those who embarked did not survive the voyage. Third, the independence movements as an exclusive project from the end of the 18th to the 19th century which resulted in the exclusion of the majority of principally indigenous populations from the project of nation state, especially in some countries of Latin America like Bolivia, Guatemala, Peru, Brazil, and others. And fourth, the interventionism and dominance of US neo-colonialism, imperialism, and the accelerated processes of globalization from the end of the 19th to the 21st century. All this resulted in a political, economic, social, and especially cultural and more particularly linguistic alienation, domination, and exploitation, often, as I already said, in form of genocide. From the 20s and 30s of the 20th century have been emerging, as I already said, multiple cultural, political, social, and artistic movements which claim to overcome the situation of alienation, discrimination, and exclusion. In the following, I refer to four of these moments. First moment, that I call Blackness and Back to Africa. The 20s and the 30s of the 20th century have been deeply marked by one movement which was very important, the movement of Harlem Renaissance, and in the context of this, the movement of Garveyism. Harlem Renaissance was an African-American cultural movement with its symbolic capital in New York, Harlem, and was a part of a larger new Negro movement, which tried to reconceptualize the Negro apart from white stereotypes and fought for the awakening of Black self-consciousness. It had a large influence in Afro-American literature and the movements for human rights later on, especially in the United States. In the context of this movement emerged also the movement of Garveyism, which refers to the person of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, born in Jamaica. He died in London. He was the leader of the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, with a branch in the United States, especially New York, Jamaica, and the island Caribbean, and also Costa Rica, Panama, the continental Caribbean, and also Africa. And this organization organized around 4 million Negroes over the world, and had a steamship line which was called Black Star Line. I will return on this steamship line later on. This movement had been characterized by what we could call a positive racism, the praise of the Negro or the Negroes and the Black race, its intent to free Africa and to go back to Africa. It means to carry 400 million Negroes all over the world back to Africa to give them a new or old homeland in Africa. This movement back to Africa, let's say it already now, failed completely because of the rejection of African governments. And later on we'll see an example of how in literary fiction it has been worked, this topic. So you can see, for instance, some of the objectives of this UNIA in the following preamble to the constitution of the organization, which was written by the founder, Marcus Garvey, and speaks for itself. The Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League is a social, friendly, humanitarian, charitable, educational, institutional, constructive, and expansive society, and is founded by persons desiring to the utmost to work for the general uplift of the Negro peoples of the world. And the members pledge themselves to do all in their power to conserve the rights of their noble race and to respect the rights of all mankind, believing always in the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God. The motto of the organization is one God, one aim, one destiny. And in a speech pronounced by Marcus Garvey in August 1921, he said the following: "Let the world know that 400 million Negroes are prepared to die or live as free men. Despise us as much as you care. Ignore us as much as you care. We are coming 400 million strong. We are coming with our woes behind us, with the memory of suffering behind us, woes and suffering of 300 years. They shall be our inspiration. My bulwark of strength in the conflict for freedom in Africa will be the 300 years of persecution and hardship left behind in this Western Hemisphere. Go on, climb ye the heights of liberty and cease not in well-doing until you have planted the banner of the red, the black, and the green in the hilltops of Africa." The second movement, I would call it Blackness and Return, not to Africa, but to the Caribbean. One refrains from being an essentially Martinican, Guadeloupean, Guyanan, African, Madagascan student in order to be not more than a black student. The life in the closed world finished. This was written in the first number of the student magazine L'Étudiant, published in Paris in 1934. It can be read as the birth certificate of the Négritude movement in Paris, which was founded by Léon Gontran d'Amas, the French Guiana, Léopold Sédar Senghor et Birago Diop de Sénégal et Aimé Césaire of Martinique. This movement is very strongly linked with the figure of Aimé Césaire, born in Martinique, and he died in Martinique some 12 years ago, especially with his book, Notebook of a Return to the Native Land, which can be read as the most important document of this movement of Négritude or Blackness, published initially in the in the magazine Volonté in 1939. In this large poem, in the first part, he paints an image of Martinique as an island of misery, inertness, resignation, and despair, and he pronounces his wish to leave this island. In the second part, he criticizes strongly the European colonialism and the tyranny over the Caribbean by European colonialism, and he starts to speak of my land, Martinique, the island, my land. And in the third part, he turns to the first person in this poem and speaks of accepting to be there. It is beautiful, good, and legitimate to be a nigger, he says in the third part. And then, so we have also in this poem, in this document, in this movement of Négritude, a brace of blackness and a claim to return to the native land. But the native land is not Africa, it is Martinique. It's returning to the Caribbean. And Négritude is a neologism. In French, blackness would say noirceur. The word Négritude didn't exist before in French. So he invented this word, and it's much more than to be of black color. It claims a whole culture, a history, a memory, and proclaims a black soul. Here you have two examples, quotation from this book, Notebook of a Return to the Native Land. I accept totally, without reservation, my race, that no ablution of hyssop mixed with lilies could purify. I accept. And afterwards he says, my Négritude is not a stone, its deafness hurled against the glamour of the day. My Négritude is not a leucoma of dead liquid over the earth's dead eye. My Négritude is neither tower nor cathedral. It takes root in the red flesh of the soil. It takes root in the ardent flesh of the sky. It breaks through opaque prostration with its upright patience.
Werner, disculpa. Can you share your screen?
I shared the screen.
Yeah, but we only see the first. The first slide. I only see the first slide, and I think the auditorio as well.
And now you see the actual one? Third moment in praise of Creoleness?
No. I see now slide number 15.
See, 15. You see it?
I see number 15, slide number 15.
Okay, so I let it like this. Seems that with a full screen, it doesn't transmit. But you understand me? You understood me?
Yes, we understand you, but if you are reading the poems,
See.
I think we would like to read with you.
The third moment, I call it in praise of Creoleness, which refers to a speech pronounced in the Festival Caraïbe in 1988 near Paris by the Martinicans Jean Bernabé, Patrick Chamoisseau, and Raphaël Confillon. The first sentence of this speech was, "Neither Europeans nor Africans nor Asians, we proclaim ourselves Creoles." 1 year after this speech was published in form of a book with the title Éloge de la Créolité, in praise of Creoleness. And this book is a book written in the tradition of Aimé Césaire's movement of the Négritude, but it's responding to the critics of the Négritude as an anti-racist racism pronounced, for instance, by Jean-Paul Sartre in the context of the national liberation movements in the north of Africa against French colonialism. And it's a book written not in praise of Blackness, but in praise of Creoleness. Creoleness understood as a mixture, a métissage, as a Caribbean, Antillean, West Indian identity. Creoleness, which in French says créolité, is understood as a poetic, artistic movement in search of our memory and history against the deformations of colonialism in the Caribbean. And I read here two quotations from this speech, from this discourse, from this book after. "We cannot reach Caribbeanness without interior vision. And interior vision is nothing without the unconditional acceptance of our Creoleness. We declare ourselves Creoles. We declare that Creoleness is the cement of our culture and that it ought to rule the foundations of our Caribbeanness. Creoleness is the interactional or transactional aggregate of Caribbean, European, African, Asian, and Levantine cultural elements, united on the same soil by the yoke of history. We are once Europe, Africa, and enriched by Asian contribution. We are also Levantine, Indians, as well as pre-Columbian Americans in some respect. Creoleness is the world diffracted but recomposed, a maelstrom of signifieds in a single signifier, a totality." And afterward they say, "Our history, or more precisely our histories, is shipwrecked in colonial history. Collective memory is the first thing on our agenda." What we believe to be the Caribbean history is just the history of the colonization of the Caribbeans. Our chronicle is behind the dates, behind the known facts. We are words behind writing. Only poetic knowledge, fictional knowledge, literary knowledge, in short, artistic knowledge, can discover us, understand us, and bring us evanescent back to the resuscitation of consciousness. And finally, the fourth moment, which I called from Creoleness to Creolization. Creolization is a concept linked to the Martinican, also Martinican intellectual, poet, novelist, essayist Édouard Clisson, who was born in 1928 and died in Paris in 2011. Some of his most outstanding works are the Caribbean Discourse, the Poetics of Relation, Introduction to a Poetics of Diversity, and a treatise on the whole world. He wrote poetry, novels, theater, and a lot of essays. So in his work, he is not in search of a unique identity, the Creoleness as cement, like pronounced by Bernabé, Confiant, et Chamoiseau, but he insists in multiple, diverse relational identities. He speaks of an identité relation in contraposition to identité racine. That means relation identity in contraposition to root identity. And he understands the creolization as a permanent process, not only in the Caribbean, but in the whole world. For he speaks of the tout monde, the whole world, which is marked, characterized by different processes of mixing up of cultures and creolization. Here we can see some sort what we could call the rhizomatic thinking. The archipelago and the mangrove are dominant metaphors in the thinking, and it's very clear that there is a strong reference to and a strong influence in post-structuralist thinkers like Deleuze, Guattari. So we can see here an example, very important example also for the mutual influences across the Atlantic of the thinking of these intellectuals. So here you have two pictures of what is the archipelago, what is the mangrove as symbols or as metaphors of this thinking. Other Caribbean thinkers and essayists who has problematized similar topics in the Caribbean have been Antonio Benitez Rojo, the Cuba and the United States, with his famous book, The Repeating Island. He understands the Caribbean as a repeating island. Each of the copies of another island is different, but it's the same, has same characteristics. So it's very interesting, with strong relation to chaos theory and physics. There's also Edward Braithwaite from Barbados, who speaks of identity and continuity across the oceans, rather than an identity grounded in one place or time. And he insists in the language spoken by Caribbean peoples not to be a dialect or inferior form of English, but a nation language expressing the complexities of Caribbean cultures and history. And there is also Maurice Condé, for example, of Guadeloupe, who has worked like Bernabé, Confiant, et Chamoiseau on Creoleness, and especially on the position of women and women writers in the Caribbean. As you see, all these ideas have been exposed and pronounced all along the Caribbean in its different sections, as well as in the Francophone, the Anglophone, and the Hispanophone Caribbean. It seems to me very important and very significant. All these movements, all these thinkings have been very important in numerous works of Caribbean fiction literature. They had a big impact in this literature, and at the same time were influenced by this literature in poetry and theater in the Hispanophone, Francophone, and Anglophone literatures of the Caribbean. In order to give you an idea of what has been the contribution of Edouard Cléon, we have two quotations here. What took place in the Caribbean, he says in his famous book, Poetics of Relation, which could be summed up in the word creolization, approximates the idea of relation for us as nearly as possible. It is not merely an encounter, a shock, a métissage, but a new and original dimension, allowing each person to be there and elsewhere, rooted and open, lost in the mountains and free beneath the sea, in harmony and in errantry. And in the same book, he speaks about root identity, relation identity. Root identity, he defines as following, is founded in the distant past in a vision, a myth of the creation of the world, is sanctified by the hidden violence of affiliation that strictly follows from this founding episode, is ratified by a claim to legitimacy that allows a community to proclaim its entitlement to the possession of a land, which thus becomes a territory, is preserved by being projected onto other territories, making their conquest legitimate, and through the projected to the project of a discursive knowledge. Root identity therefore rooted the thought of self and of territory, and set in motion the thought of the other and of voyage. In contraposition with this, his position on relation identity is the following. Relation identity is linked not to a creation of the world, but to the conscious and contradictory experience of context among cultures, is produced in the chaotic network of relation and not in the hidden violence of filiation, does not devise any legitimacy as its guarantee of entitlement, but circulates newly extended, does not think of a land as territory from which to project toward other territories, but as a place where one gives one and with rather than grasps. Relation identity exalts the thought of errantry and of totality. In order to show you, finishing this conference in some moments, the influence in Caribbean literature and the influence of Caribbean literature in the thinking, I will quote from two books, one from the continental Caribbean from Costa Rica, and another novel from the island Caribbean from Martinique. The first quote, first two quotations are from the novel Lemon Blues, published in 2002 by the Costa Rican writer Ana Cristina Rossi. And she refers to the movement of Marcus Garvey, the Back to Africa, to bring back 400 million people, Black people, to Africa. And he describes the moment in which one ship, steamship of the Black Star Line will come to the coast of Liberia. And so we can see what happens in this moment. When the coast of Liberia glimpsed, says the novel, the mission met to receive instructions. The captain read out a message he just had received. It said, "The government of the Republic of Liberia warns all the steamship companies that no member of the movement called of Garvey will be allowed to land, and that any company who may evade this disposition will be obliged to transport the Garveyist to the United States. So they will not be allowed to land in Africa." And the second quotation, I let it in the original in order to show you the code switching between English, Creole, and Spanish in this novel, written in Spanish mainly, which says the following: "We Negroes had this dream, regresar al Africa, go back to Africa. Al principio era un sueño, in the beginning was a dream. Después se convirtió en una freaking necesidad. Afterwards it converted to a freaking necessity. Y cuando más lo necesitábamos, el regreso falló y ahora no tenemos nada." And when we most needed it, the going back to Africa failed, and now we have nothing. En Jamaica no hay futuro. In Jamaica there's no future. En las otras islas menos. In the other island less. En Cuba el futuro se nos acabó. In Cuba the future finished. Aquí en Limón también todo se termina. Here in Limón, in the coast, Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, everything also finished. El orgullo de raza que Garvey fomenta es superficial. The race, proud for the race fomented by Garvey is superficial. Look out for me, los negros, nos desconocemos. Look out for me, we Negroes, we don't know us. And final quotation from the novel Black is Black, a very, very ironic title, written by Raphael Confior, Martinican writer, and published in 2008. One of the protagonists of the novel speaks of the women of the island of Martinique from a very male point of view, but it's very emblematic, I think, for the mixed identities which live in the islands of the Caribbean or the Caribbean in general. The novel says, I simply discovered a young, intelligent, and nice woman. In our little island world abound the most fertile beauties, crushing mulattas whose silky gaze is nailing you, hot and golden Jabin, with whom one wants to dance the quadrilla, black and enchanting Negro women like a midnight in the rainy season, capiras whose yellow-bellied toad skin was being praised by the regionalist poets, whereas they are authentic sorceresses, Indian coolies so tender and sweet that they seem to be murmuring flesh, or those Chinese or Syrian bastards whose posture and waist are charming. Jabin in the French Creole of Martinique means a woman with a clear skin and African traits. In Capira, in the same language, means a mestiza woman with clear skin, green eyes, and African-style hair, whereas Indian coolie means an Asian look woman descendant from Asian, especially Indian migrants to the Caribbean and to Latin America. So here you have, I think, an allegory of the mixed identities, of the creolization of this population, it results that the title of the novel, Black is Black, is completely ironic, because we could say that there are 50 shades of black, if you like it, and not only one black in the Caribbean. I don't know if we have 3 or 4 minutes mass, or okay, more than not mass. There are a lot of other literary works in the Hispanophone, Anglophone, and Francophone Caribbeans which question in very similar ways the movement back to Africa and the claim of one Black identity. I only put here some of these works, beginning with the theater of Derek Walcott from St. Lucia, English-speaking Caribbean, up to Yannick Lyons from Haiti, from the French-speaking Caribbean. There are a lot more of novels, poems, and theater works which problematize, thematize these aspects which I described before. So I will end with a short coda on the concept of afrodescendance, which has turned very dominant in all the discussion on Caribbean, Latin American indigenous identity, and which has become a very important concept. It was first pronounced in a document, an official document in the Regional Conference of the Americas in Santiago de Chile in 2000 in preparation of the World Conference of the United Nations Against Racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, which took place in Durban in South Africa, and which was published afterwards, the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. In this documents and all the movements who claim this concept as their identity, afrodescendance is a militant concept in the fight against racism and discrimination and for human rights. But what seems to me very important is that the definition of afrodescendants is based principally on their character of victims. So we have some sort of victimization of Afro-descendant populations. You can see it in a paper published by the United Nations, the Office of the High Commissioner for the Human Rights on Afro-descendants. And it says the Afro-descendants live in many countries all over the world, distributed among the local population or forming communities. The major concentration can be found in Latin America and the Caribbean, where its estimated number ascends to 150 million persons. It is a precise group of victims who continues to be discriminated as an historical legacy of transatlantic slave trade. Even those Afro-descendants whose ancestors were not slaves suffer from racism and discrimination that subsists still today, many generations after the abolition of slave trade. And in the same document, they say the Afro-descendants constitute a heterogeneous group with diverse histories, experiences, and identities. The circumstances they live in and the problems they are confronted with are various. What, however, unites them is the fact that they have been denied during a long time the full accomplishment of its human rights, and it's possible to highlight a series of common problems. So I have the doubt if Afrodescendants really could be a strong scientific concept. Of course, it's a militant concept, very justified in the fight against discrimination, against racism, but I think it does not make visible all the cultural tradition, history, different history of the different populations which are called Afro-descendants. And so I think it's a concept which comes from descendants. It's a concept of genetics, of biology, or at the same time, descendants as heritage. It's a concept of jurisdiction. So it is a limitation I am not very convinced of. I think we should intend to develop a different concept which allows us to visibilize all the different histories, cultures, traditions, etc., that have the different population called Afro-descendants. And so I think one challenge for us is to develop a non-biologist or non-legalist concept of these people. And I always speak of Afro-reference, but because what we have seen in these 4 moments which I presented to you of identity movements is the reference to Africa, to African cultures, not so much the descendants, the genetic aspect, but more cultural aspects, more relational aspects. And I think this would allow us to overcome the victimization of this population and to develop a concept in strong relation to what Clisson has developed as, let's say, relational identities, and in order to seek forms of living together of this different population with a very different and also changing, volatile identities. And I will turn with the translation to English of the fragment of the poem which I read at the beginning of my conference in Creole. So this poem says in English: "Back to Africa, Miss Mattie, you know not what you speak. Would have to have been there first, before returning from whence you seek. The majority of your family, that entire generation, was born in Jamaica. They are all Jamaican. Travel, seek your fortune, but tell no one there that you are going to seek your homeland, because you are already there in the Caribbean, not in Africa, in the different identities, in different populations, which are the populations of the Caribbean." And I think this can be taken as an allegory of the situation of the Caribbean and of our task as scientists to make visible all this diversity of the Caribbean in our studies and our work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Werner. It was a pleasure to have you here, and it was a pleasure to meet you not in organizational meetings, but in a scientific talk about what thrills us in epistemology of our different materials. So it was very nice, and I think it was absolutely to the point, a good end point for this first part of my lecture on Africans in America, and it's a good transfer to the next part in the summer term, where we speak about post-colonial societies, identities, the return movements of Marcus Garvey, the Rastafari movement, and so on, Pan-Africanism. So thank you very much. It was really to the point.